5 months out from the U.S. presidential election, 81-year-old Joe Biden and the news outlets in his corner have failed to convince voters that his age is not an issue. Escalation alert from the Lebanon-Israel border. The rhetoric that is raising fears of an all-out war with Hezbollah. And is it a news outlet or a hedge fund? In fact, it is both. We begin in Washington, D.C. with the U.S. presidential election, a battle of, if not for, the ages. A contest that pits the incumbent Joe Biden, who is 81 years old, against Donald Trump, a relative spring chicken, at 78. The two eldest presidential nominees in American history going head-to-head in the world's foremost superpower. On Biden, voters have been telling pollsters for months now that his age and mental competency are a major concern. But that was not reflected in most mainstream media coverage, with the exception of Fox News, a pro-Trump channel that cannot get enough of this story. Less conservative outlets, those out to stop Trump, had long turned a blind eye to the issue, but over the past few weeks, a series of senior moments by Biden have been too disturbing to ignore. His tendency to sometimes babble incomprehensibly during his speeches, freezing on the spot, mixing up the names of world leaders. Those moments have gone viral and put those news outlets on the spot over why they had downplayed this story for so long, hoping that it would just go away.
The White House today vehemently pushing back on a new report on the president's age and mental acuity. The White House.
For voters, age is a factor in how they're viewing this election.
Video of the day comes to us from a recent Los Angeles campaign fundraiser where President Biden yet again froze in a geriatric trance.
The right-wing media, whenever Biden appears in public, there is a video that shows him doing something that is characterized as a senior moment.
It was sometimes difficult to watch, especially the president of our United States, when he would fall like this or even misspeak.
Oftentimes they are selectively edited and it makes him look confused or like he needs more help.
The Prime Minister of Italy has to pull him back with the leaders of the G7 to remind him why they're there.
And certainly there have been some gaffes that he's made that didn't need any editing help.
The problem for the Biden campaign is that while there are some examples of the former, there are many more of the latter. Cases where Joe Biden looks or sounds like a geriatric.
We'll never forget lying around and him lying around, actually.
The New York Post, a conservative Murdoch-owned paper, circulated this video of Biden appearing to lose his bearings at the recent G7 summit, wandering away from the crowd. A wider angle showed he was simply acknowledging some paratroopers who had just landed. But what about these moments, recent ones? 2 weeks ago, on June 6th, Biden's visit to France, where he randomly turned around, confusing Emmanuel Macron, who then followed suit awkwardly. The following week, a fundraising event in LA, where the president appeared frozen by the moment and was led off the stage by Barack Obama. And even when Biden's at a podium, as he was 3 days after that, he looks just fine, but the words can come out garbled.
I'm not sure I understand.
The biggest challenge for Biden is that he's an 81-year-old who looks and sounds like an 81-year-old. And these videos are appealing on the right because there's this larger narrative that the president is sort of senile and being managed by aides, that he's a kind of a Manchurian candidate type president, where others are pulling the strings.
The flip of that is that in much more progressive media, you will see regular suggestions that Biden just knocked it out of the park, that he's doing really, really well.
The President of the United States' body moves a little slower, but his mind is just as quick as ever. Right?
And so what you see is this conflict in our media. Images of Biden that suggest he's not doing very well, images of Biden that seem to suggest he's doing very well indeed.
Questions about Joe Biden and aging go back to the 2020 campaign, when he acknowledged it was a factor and indicated he would be a one-term president.
Look, I view myself as a bridge, not as anything else.
Back then, at age 77, Biden was already being asked if he had been tested for cognitive decline, he did not take it well.
No, I haven't taken a test. Why the hell would I take a test? Come on, man.
For the initial years of the Biden administration, liberal mainstream outlets paid scant attention to the president's age, providing minimal coverage of his senior moments. But they could not ignore a story from earlier this year, an investigation into Joe Biden's improper handling of classified documents. That report did not call for criminal charges against Biden, partly on the grounds that his memory was so poor.
He did not remember, even within several years, the report says, when his son Beau died.
He then tried to conduct some damage control on that and failed.
So you have this moment in the aftermath of a concerning report regarding Joe Biden's memory issues. And here he has an opportunity to go out in front of the American people and show that that report was incorrect. And he goes out there and mistakenly says that President Sisi is from Mexico.
The president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow.
Of course, one could say that that was just a verbal gaffe, but in this particular moment, when you were looking for reassurance, people start to wonder, is Biden's age attached to his decision-making? And that starts to become a bigger narrative.
55% say he is too old to be president, but the media, they try to convince us otherwise.
Conservative media, led by Fox News, along with the Republican Party, have pointed out the reluctance of more liberal outlets to talk about Joe Biden's age. What they sometimes label a media conspiracy is more like a case of inconsistency, and it fits a larger pattern.
For the Trump administration, it's not a bug or a side dilemma to deal with this incarceration. It appears to be a feature.
MSNBC, CNN, and papers like the New York Times were tough on Donald Trump's policy of deporting undocumented immigrants. But when Joe Biden uses similar language, it does not attract the same kind of headlines.
Trump's constant sucking up to Kim Jong-un, North Korea's murderous dictator, isn't working out for the United States.
They were critical of Trump on foreign policy, but have repeatedly come up short, with a few exceptions, when scrutinizing the Biden administration's central role in arming Israel's genocidal war on Gaza. And those outlets are well aware that Joe Biden's age is an issue for voters, who have been telling pollsters that for years, yet they kept downplaying the story. What those news organizations cannot control or limit is the traction this story gets on social media with younger Americans, all those videos of Biden acting his age.
For many young people who get their news on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, they might be getting a different view than what older people see on network news or on the New York Times. And TikTok, Instagram, Twitter can be a bit more democratizing, that certain things that don't get covered in bigger outlets make it through. And some doctored things, misinformation, absolutely circulates too. But as a whole, naturally, you are what you eat in a lot of ways.
It's similar to a divide that we've seen on some really important issues. For instance, on Gaza. Young people get a lot of information via social media, and they see images that are horrifying and accurate portrayals of the nightmare on the ground in Gaza, whereas a lot of older folks are getting ABC, NBC, CBS, mainstream legacy media outlet portrayal that is a softer portrayal of what's going on. And if it creates a divide on so central and important an issue as Gaza, you will also see divides on the presidential race in the United States and on politics in general.
I also think consumers of news have really siloed themselves, and our social media algorithms make that even more likely when you're online searching for an answer that you want rather than the information that could help more broadly inform you is a symptom of how we view politics now. And it's critical to keep in mind that we're all living in sort of alternate realities based on where we get our information.
Multiple polls have concluded that Joe Biden and Donald Trump are the most unpopular presidential candidates in U.S. history. How did it come to this? Is that on the political parties for ignoring public opinion, the mainstream media for failing to reflect it? The two candidates are also the oldest to ever run for president. One, a convicted felon whose rise in 2016 was powered by news outlets that feasted on the ratings he attracted. The other, prone to mental lapses in public that many journalists have dismissed as a non-issue. It is no wonder that trust in the U.S. media is also close to an all-time low.
Frankly, one can only hope that when the 2024 campaign is done, no matter how it turns out, that there will be a lot of self-examination on the part of American media as regards how it's covered this race and frankly a lot of politics for a very long time. Media creates realities, right? They create a reality that people think their alternatives are narrow, and I like to think that the 2024 election is the last election of its kind, i.e. the last election in which both parties will nominate somebody who's already been nominated before, who America is in many ways probably pretty sick of.
I receive enormous amounts of criticism when I write negative stories about Joe Biden. There is a real reluctance to cover this administration as critically as it sometimes deserves because of the larger sense that that is an in-kind contribution to Donald Trump in some way. With Biden's age, I think you can do this in a way that doesn't feel ageist, right? You can cover it, and covering this administration critically is actually the best way to ensure the long-term health of American democracy.
To Israel's northern front now and its conflict with the Lebanese political and armed group Hezbollah. The intensity of cross-border attacks and the ratcheting up of the rhetoric have raised fears of an all-out war. Tariq Nafi has been following the messaging.
This week, Hezbollah released a provocative surveillance drone video recorded some 17 miles inside Israeli territory. The footage captures a range of civilian areas and sensitive military infrastructure, including ships the Israeli Navy has docked in Haifa and what Hezbollah alleges are Israeli air defense systems. The message of the video is clear. Hezbollah can penetrate Israeli airspace undetected and, if it wants, target key strategic sites. It's all part of a gradual unveiling of Hezbollah's capabilities we've seen in recent video releases. Psychological warfare designed to put pressure on Lebanon's southern neighbor. Israel's immediate response to the video was one of their own, footage claiming to show an airstrike on a team of Hezbollah drone operators. Israel's Minister of Foreign Affairs then took to X to suggest that all-out war is imminent and that Hezbollah would be destroyed. On a related note, this week, an Israeli military spokesman admitted that the government was misleading the public by saying it could destroy Hamas in Gaza. Nevertheless, it's a message parts of the Israeli media have been peddling for months.
יכולותיו של צה"ל גבוהות מאוד, יותר מ-67, והוא מסוגל להשמיד לא רק את חמאס, הוא מסוגל להשמיד גם את חיזבאללה.
None of this went unnoticed by Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. On Wednesday, he said threats made by Israel, including in the Israeli media, do not scare the group, and that Hezbollah is not bluffing about its readiness for war.
إذا فرضت الحرب على لبنان فإن المقاومة ستقاتل بلا ضوابط وبلا قواعد وبلا أسقف.
The intensifying rhetoric and violence means all-out war could be just one miscalculation away. Nasrallah ended by noting that the only way Israel can have quiet on its northern border is through a ceasefire in Gaza.
Thanks, Tariq. There is a new kind of financial journalism emerging, both ambitious and somewhat ambiguous, one that blurs the line between reporting and profit-making. Hunterbrook Media is a New York-based company known for its investigate and trade strategy. It has broken some major news stories, including from underreported countries like Namibia, Peru, and Borneo. Many of its investigations target companies operating in those countries, and they are dual purpose, providing the kind of in-depth reporting that many traditional news outlets cannot afford to do, plus, and the bottom line matters to outlets like Hunterbrook, conducting thorough checks of certain companies before investing in them. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on whether Hunterbrook and its ilk have cracked the code for doing meaningful journalism that pays for itself, or whether, like most of what we see coming out of the world of finance, we need to read the fine print.
Have you been scammed by what might be the biggest mortgage fraud since the financial crisis? That was how Hunterbrook Media broke its first big investigation. The subject of its story was United Wholesale Mortgage, UWM, the largest mortgage broker in the United States. What Hunterbrook uncovered was an elaborate scheme, a fraud.
Hunterbrook published a story about United Wholesale Mortgage, alleging that these supposedly independent brokers funneled a lot of business towards United Wholesale Mortgage, improperly saddling customers with huge costs.
Frankly, this company was creating a monopoly with these brokers, and so that they would feel like they had to give their business to his company. And we've uncovered, documentation as well as bizarre voicemails sort of threatening brokers.
Hunterbrook basically said that UWM had captured a bunch of mortgage brokers who would always give them every mortgage, even when they weren't the cheapest or the best for the client. And that's kind of not cool.
What caught people's attention with the UWM story was not just the company's fraud-reliant business model. It was the unconventional, some might say ethically dubious operating model of the Hunterbrook newsroom. That's because Hunterbrook is not your typical news outlet. It is a whole new breed, a double-headed institution consisting of Hunterbrook Capital, the financial arm, a hedge fund that trades in stocks and invests in multiple assets, and Hunterbrook Media, the investigative journalism arm.
Hunterbrook is incredibly different from every other news organization, basically because it's not aimed at the reader. The purpose is to provide trading ideas to the hedge fund. And the idea is that the news organization reports the news, and it's market-moving news, and then the hedge fund knows what the news is going to be and can position itself to make money when the market moves.
Hunterbrook Media is engaged in the kind of research that we often see from short sellers, but also from journalists, where they do deep dives into companies, into markets, into commodities, and they come up with investment theses. In the case of United Wholesale Mortgage, they published this story that was damning, and they took a short position in that company and took a long position in a rival called Rocket.
Our affiliate, Hunterbrook Capital, also bet against UWM stock.
Short selling, very simply, is a bet that the shares of a company will fall. So if you are making that kind of bet, you need to know information about that company, that once that information becomes public, that people will stop wanting to invest in that company in the same way.
And it's at that point that the company's stock prices fall. And the hedge fund, for example, an outfit like Hunterbrook Capital, makes money because it had placed a bet on those falling prices. There are obvious benefits to this kind of profit-motivated journalism. Few things encourage good work quite like money. So the investigations by Hunterbrook Media are thorough and well backed up. There's a big downside too. While there is a strong incentive to dig deep into companies whose stock could be shorted, there's no upside to poking into the affairs of companies that Hunterbrook Capital, the hedge fund, has money riding on. For instance, would Rocket Mortgage get the same journalistic treatment that United Wholesale Mortgage got? When we asked Hunterbrook Media's editorial advisor, William Cohen, this, he said those questions were beyond his purview.
Look, I'm an advisor on the journalism of Hunterbrook Media. I have nothing to do with Hunterbrook Capital. So I may not be your best guide to answering this question.
However, Hunterbrook Media did not agree to speak with us. The company does have a lot of information online though. On the relationship between the two sides of the organization, it says this: it is essential for our culture that these two aspects of our organization maintain independence. Importantly, Hunterbrook Media's reporting may drive Hunterbrook Capital's investments. Hunterbrook Capital's investments must never drive Hunterbrook Media's reporting. There's another important note in the company's list of principles. It's about what are called insider sources. Hunterbrook investigators cannot use them because if Hunterbrook Capital made any trades based on that information, it would be insider trading, and that is illegal.
So insider trading is basically when you trade on material non-public information, when there's some kind of an insider in the company who knows secret information and they trade on that information, and that is illegal because it means that the market isn't fair, that people are trading on information that not everyone has. What Hunterbrook do is they are very careful to only use all of the vast amounts of public information that are out there in the world and aggregate that information and put a story together. You can use open source techniques just like war journalists can.
The writers, the journalists who work there are skilled in, data mining, scrubbing and analyzing the data and making conclusions based on the data. There's a whole language, there's a whole argot of Wall Street and finance that if you can't speak that language, you're going to find yourself overwhelmed very quickly.
This kind of detailed, often complex financial reporting isn't exclusive to Hunterbrook. There are entire companies that do just this, using and refining methods of financial investigation for themselves or their clients. They dig into everything, from consumer trends to corporate regulation. The research is gold dust in an industry where every bit of intelligence can be leveraged to make better investments. One firm that gained notoriety recently is Hindenburg Research, a short seller. It says it specializes in forensic financial research. The company caused a splash in January 2023.
So Adani was the richest man in India. He was very close to Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, and Hindenburg basically put together this massive report saying that the entire edifice was deeply corrupt and that the stock market valuation of the company was massively way too high.
This report is a bet against Asia's richest man by a firm which specializes in shorting stocks and therefore making its money.
People read the report, they sold the stock, and the valuation of the company dropped by $150 billion or something like that. And that was a huge scandal in India and financially very damaging to the Adani family.
There have been lots of accusations against this company. They've denied them thus far, but that hasn't stopped the market from selling.
The main difference between a place like Hindenburg and Hunterbrook is that Hunterbrook has also said that they will publish stories that are not related to their own investment theses. They have a lot of foreign bureaus, and so they've also published stories that they are not investing on. And so that would be one of the differences between a place like Hindenburg and Hunterbrook.
Hunterbrook has a wide range of deeply reported stories from undercover geographies and under-scrutinized industries. It is a journalist's dream. What it takes to bankroll that dream, however, is ethically murky and made complicated by the vested interests at play. That is the reality of a lot of media financing, though. Whether ad-funded, state-funded, or, as in this case, hedge fund-backed, journalistic outlets often have to make hard decisions.
There's a huge need to be creative about the way investigative reporting is subsidized now and underwritten because it is expensive and it takes a lot of time. And it often results in litigation from billionaires who will think nothing of threatening reporters. And so if it means that there's a wall between the journalists and the people who are, trying to make money to subsidize and to underwrite that investigative reporting, as long as no laws are broken, I'm all for it.
There is no way that Hunterbrook is going to be the savior of media. They have a really interesting business model, and there is a chance that that business model will work. There is also a pretty high chance that that business model will fail. And so journalism is going to need to continue struggling with its existing struggles, that this is not some kind of panacea that is going to be able to bring a whole new revenue stream to the kind of stuff that you and I do.
And finally, this past week, the Associated Press published an investigation into Israel's killing of entire families in Gaza, a vital, if overdue, piece of journalism. The details are chilling. Entire bloodlines, as many as 4 generations of the same family wiped out. In some cases, there's nobody left to document who has been killed. The AP's reporting was thoroughly researched. It connects the slaughtering of those families with the war crimes and genocide cases that Israel is facing at The Hague. The Israelis often excuse their actions, calling them mistakes. But as the AP shows, there is nothing accidental about the obliterating of Palestinian families in Gaza. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.